this is like the introduction, or how I would introduce our interaction. Was, it was like, I heard you on a podcast, and I was like instantly just like, I gotta talk to that dude. um Partly because we both come from creative spaces, but there's like this vibe. I'm sure because you've been in, music spaces, you can relate to this. But it's like, whether you're jumping on a tour for the first time, or you're in a rehearsal space, or you show up, it's like there's different energies of people in the room. And my vibe is kind
Yeah.
of like lay back a little bit, kind of soak it all in. And generally speaking, I would connect with the people that were a little bit more of that vibe, not necessarily like straight up wallflower, but just like people that didn't have to jump in and project their energy and just like get into the get into the rough and tumble of what how creative spaces can feel sometimes. So it's like you have like this,
Yeah.
this quiet, calm, kind of zen demeanor about you, that I was like, okay, this guy is cool, and I think I can talk to him about all sorts of stuff.
Well, I appreciate that, man, because I've sometimes have felt in my life that I am relatively introverted and keep to myself, but I've felt the pressure to be more social butterfly and kind of I also have like in my, as I'm sure we'll get into, in my human design, I do have a uh my throat chakra is supposed to be used. I'm supposed to speak more. And it is part of like as I've been becoming more conscious and trying to be my authentic self, it's like I'm meant to speak and talk. But I had so much trauma around like early childhood, and as I kind of succeeded in the world, I became like a people pleaser and felt insecure sometimes in speaking my truth. So I became like really reclusive, sometimes to a fault, that I wouldn't, speak up when it was valid to speak up. And I felt like I was always that shy, quiet person. But there's a side of me that's like not wanting to do that. But then, as you do learn about consciousness and being able to actually effectively communicate, a big part of it is actually like being quiet until you're invited to say something is actually the kind of the most effective way to really like connect. And so it's something that I feel like I've done that is like part of me is being reserved and quiet in the corner. But I battled with for a long time feeling like guilty that I wasn't doing more and saying more. And as I've started to heal that, it's just really knowing like when the right time is to talk. And I've learned a lot of the times just shutting up is the smarter thing to do, like half the time that's benefited me a lot, I don't say stupid things and get myself into trouble, but it's a balance for sure. Yeah. I always too, I'm like inherently, I love getting deep and talking deep about things. And I think I got shut down a lot when I would take a mundane conversation quickly to like a life crisis conversation that's very deep. And then people would, be turned off by that. And then I would feel bitter about it and regretful. And so it's like, yeah, it's just knowing how and when to do it. But and I've gotten, people like a lot of times I was younger in midlife, I got um, pinned as somebody that was just Mr. Know-it-all, trying to always take it very deep, but it's just mostly a curiosity. And that's what I enjoy is like deep conversation. So yeah, it's a battle, like being really authentic and not being thrown off by somebody else's idea of what that is. It's been quite a battle, but I definitely feel kind of like I'm reblossoming into a place where I can just speak without any fear, when I need to.
Yeah, well, I think that was one of the things that I was drawn in when I was just hearing you speak, and then when I found out that you're doing creative sessions, it was just like if we were like in the same town and we had some mutual friends, I'd ask you for a coffee. But when I found out that you were doing creative sessions, I was like, okay, I just gotta talk to this guy. Like,
Yeah.
we got to make some
No,
time
I
for
love
this,
it.
because I felt similar to you. Like, I I love I love being able to just like get into life and live life on any kind of level of depth with people. But similarly, it's like I that happens after I've had like deep conversations with people, like after I've gone
Yeah.
really deep, then it feels like, I can sometimes be hierarchical with it, but it's like the lighter stuff of life or like the fluff of life is fun after I've engaged in like the
Yeah,
really like
totally.
deep things that, like you said, it's not, I mean, there's been times where depression or like it's been really important to figure things out, but it's also like just what I'm curious about. Like I'm just fascinated about like what in the world this human experience is, and hearing from
Yeah.
different people and their experiences and how they see it and how they've done it. Like all that stuff's just fascinating to
Yeah.
me.
It's so fascinating to me too. I always felt alone in that because a lot of the people I'd surrounded myself with didn't really want to think deep and go into those deep places. And again, why I would kind of just be quiet is that I never really could get deep with anybody. Most people, a lot of the people that I was surrounded with, just they got fulfillment from talking about sports or the weather or whatever those surface level conversations were. And again, I agree. I like having those fluff conversations once we've had some depth and we can kind of get into some of those more deeper concepts. It gives me a good feeling of like where the other person's at and I can trust them. Um, and so yeah, it's definitely been I had to like surround myself with the right people really was like the key to start being able to do that. I had all the wrong people around me, I think. Which again is another projector concept is like you can't you really have to have the right people around you that understand you deeply and want to have deep conversations and just get into that. And so it was brutal for a while. I felt very alone in my world. But I'm sure we'll get into some of it too, is I just made a couple actions in life that people didn't understand and didn't like, and kind of in one swath got rid of the people that didn't matter really, And I cared about a lot of them. They were very sweet people, but there was a misunderstanding there that I probably could have fought more to try to bring clarity to. But at that point in my life, I was just like, well, I guess if you don't get it and you don't want to reach out to try to get it, then this is like an answer from the universe. We're not jiving anymore. It was difficult, but
Yeah, for sure. I've been in those situations as well, and sometimes like the easiest picture I've or metaphor that I've had is just understanding without like getting into the details. It's like you're with people that you were on some sort of path with, and you realize they're going this way in their path, and you are curious about what's over here or what's over there, or whatever. And not that the experience that you had weren't true or beautiful or had lessons in them, but it's like you want to go a different direction, and they're going in a
yeah,
different direction, and it's just how life is sometimes. It's not good or bad; it just is.
yeah, exactly.
Well, I know we're going to get into some human design stuff eventually, but let's go more into like your story and your history and as a musician. And when did music become the thing for you?
It was always a thing. I guess music really, I mean, I was a listener to music for a long time, but it really began when in middle school, for me in the town that I lived in, middle school band was like a hip, cool thing to do. And I knew going into it, into middle school, that was like an elective I really wanted to take. And my sister had actually she's 5 years older than me, so she had already been through the program. So I had been a big fan of music, listening mostly to my sister's CDs. She had, back in the day when you had books of CDs. And that was like where I got all my music from, really. And I joined a band, and my sister was actually a drummer, had gone through the program, and she can dance, but she's not a very good rhythmic person. She did not really succeed in the program. And so my the band instructor knew my name, knew the last name from my sister. And you come in the first day and you kind of get to pick what instrument you want to play. And so when it came to me, I was like, I want to play drums. And he looked at me kind of funny and he was like, maybe you should try something else. Like your sister played drums, you shouldn't do that. Which I then realized it really was like my sister didn't do very well in it. But I was crushed because I was like, drums are what I want to do. I don't want to play anything else. But he was like, why don't you go home and think about it and come back tomorrow? So I went home, just crisis, and was like, all right, I guess I'll play trombone. It was like the next best thing for some reason. So I had like accepted it that I was going to be a trombone player and came back in the next day and he was putting us into our sections and he just came to me and said, Mark, okay, go to the drums and just went by me. And I was like, "Ugh, holy shit. Okay. I think I'm going to be a drummer. I don't have to say trombone. And so I just kept my mouth shut and started playing drums at that point. So I went through that whole thing in middle school, and about halfway through, a friend of mine that was going to the local church, me and him started playing like in a garage band just on free time. He was a guitar player, and we became really close. And he then invited me. He was like, "Hey, you should come to church. Their high school worship band is actually all graduating, and they need a new band. And we don't have a drummer or anything, so you should come hang out." So I went to that and I didn't grow up. My parents were not very religious. We didn't go to church. It was, it wasn't really good or bad to me. I wasn't into church, but I was like, if I get to go play music, I'll go. This sounds fun. Um, and it was a really like big church. They had a lot of money. And so we had like a full setup. It was like 300 to 400 kids, every week for the youth group. And then the weekend sessions is like 1,000 plus people. And over the 4 years that I played there, it grew even bigger. We had two separate buildings and did like a broadcast. And so it's really where I like cut my teeth on performing under pressure and learning how to play to a click track and just all those different things that later in life were going to be really valuable to me. Um, but in this arena, it was for, worship music, which was like I jived with. It was like some of the music's kind of cheesy to play, but we had enough fun with it. So I, all the way through high school, that was where all of my music expression was. We had like little garage bands that we would put together just for fun. Um, but that's where I really like fell in love with performing it. Not so much writing it yet because we were just playing worship songs. Um, so then alongside of that though, I was a filmmaker too. I really loved making just movies at home. And then also for the church, they had huge budgets, so we would make little videos for the youth group and stuff. So I became like a video intern there, and really was like thinking that that was going to be my career, is that I wanted to do filmmaking. We had a really good TV program in my high school, and so by the time I graduated, I was sure that I was going to be doing film and wanted to go to LA for that. So I graduated like it was 2003. And like the next day I went to LA. I got the hell out of there. I just really wanted to get out of my hometown. And so knew that music was always something that was probably just it was be a hobby. Like if I had gotten into another, um, position to play music, I would do it, but film was like my main focus. That's what got me to LA. And then probably like 3 months into the school, I started to really not like actually the all the rules that were coming with like filmmaking out there. I really loved the guerrilla style of it, and I started to like be a little bit conflicted with, do I want to do this? And in that meantime, a friend of a friend through my church actually had basically like reached out to me and said there's an opportunity. This band was looking for a drummer. And so again, in my head, I'm like, oh, cool, it's a hobby. It's something I can fill my free time with while I'm not doing school. I'll go try out. And tried out for the band, and it was like an immediate match. It felt really great. And they were all about the same age, mostly older. And through that, within a couple of months of that, I felt the pull that I was just like, actually, I think music is what I want to do. I'm gonna switch it around. Film will be like kind of my B plan, and I'm just gonna go for this with music. So I had taken all this money out for film school, and it really was, my parents were supportive of it, but um I didn't know how to kind of just, I was gonna finish the film school, but I was like pivoting and all this money was gonna go to waste. But I did it anyways, and I kind of cheated my way through the rest of the school. I barely showed up. And it wasn't like a college, it was just like a vocational type school. So you have like 1 year of training. And so this band, it was called Malbec, and it was what I put all my eggs in the basket for. It was like, I'm gonna try to like succeed with this, and finished school, and then was in debt, like crazy debt, just kept deferring my loan for years. And that band was together for, I guess, about 5 years. And we had some moderate success. We got like a publishing deal, and we had some decent income, not enough to like supplement. I still had to work coffee shop jobs and stuff, but this was like my baby. I was like putting all of my energy into it. And near the end of that, I started to actually get a little bit creatively stifled and wanted to just branch out a bit. So my manager at the time, I just told him that like, hey, if you get any, if there's any bands or anybody that you hear needs a drummer just to perform or record or whatever, like throw my name in the bucket because I really want to branch out and just see what else is out there. And one of the first people that he introduced me to was Mark Foster, which is the guy who I was then later in a band with for 10 years. And it was very surface level at first. It was mostly I was just coming in to try out to be a drummer for a showcase. And so it was just going to be this like one gig. But he came over and we hung out, and there was just this like immediate effortless of connection. With my old band, there was always this creative tension. I just never felt fulfilled. It was like I was pushing a lot. And with this, it felt so easy and natural. We were like on the same page about everything creatively, but then like business wise, what our goals were. And so we just started hanging out a lot. That showcase actually didn't end up panning out. But he was like prolific. He had so much music already written, and it was just him. He had been trying to put bands together for years, but hadn't really found anybody. So it was still, Malbec was like my main thing, but like this was really satisfying to me. And I started having like kind of dual rehearsals. Like he would come over a lot while the band wasn't rehearsing. We would use our space to work on his music. And then he started putting together some other members, and we finally had like 4 members. Just a bass player, me, Mark, who played guitar as well. And then we had another like auxiliary guy that was just doing a lot of programming. And somewhere in there, I started to actually, just a quick side note, because I think it's interesting to later conversation. I had promised my sister, I told my sister when I first joined Malbec, there was one guy in the band that was 25 years old, and I was like 19 at the time. And I thought that was insane that he was 25 and he was like pursuing this little band that like didn't have success, and it's like so hard to make money. For some reason in my mind, I was like, that's so old. Like what? I can't believe he's doing this. Like you should have more roots or something, you know? It's kind of a harsh judgment. But at the time I told my sister, I was like, hey, if this never, like, if I'm 25 and this isn't working still, like, wake me up and remind me to maybe get off, because I don't want to just be like, lost in life. So sure enough, that year came around when I was 25. She asked me to go out to dinner. And at this point, I was struggling in Malbec. I just wasn't not happy. I wasn't fulfilled at all. And she sat me down. She's like, hey, you told me to remind you when you're 25 that if you're still in this band, you're not happy, that you need to leave. And it was like the day before I was turning 25. And so I was like, shit, you're right. I think I need to jump. So like 2 days later, I called a band meeting and said that it was time for me to leave. And again, this Foster thing was like going, but I was so kind of disheartened by like the Malbec thing failing. I didn't want to just jump to that. It was something that was fulfilling, but I was kind of doubting it all at that point and thinking I need to go back to film. What am I going to do to make money? I don't, just lost. And Mark had actually also been disheartened by the business of it, like constantly getting promised things and then it not succeeding. I wasn't able to commit as much as he wanted to because I was really committed to my band. Another member was like working in film. It was really hard for him to get us together and synergize to get this like momentum. And so we hadn't talked for a while right during this time, and he was actually getting ready to pivot as well and move to London and just kind of stop all the connections in LA, start over somewhere. And I reached out to him and was like, "Hey, I actually just quit my band. I finally like did it. I'm done." And then he was like, "Holy shit, really? Like, okay, let's get together and talk." And we got kind of recommitted to each other, and said that this was like he really wanted me to, you know, put all my eggs in and go for it. And I was a little bit apprehensive. I was excited about it, but I was like, I'm kind of half in, half out. I think I need to figure myself out, but like I'm here. Let's see what we can do. And so I used my other band's rehearsal space for a matter of months, before I actually like, because I lived in our rehearsal space as well. So I was able to use that as our like for Foster's kind of place, our like home base to be able to start rehearsing and starting to write some stuff. And I can't remember the exact time, but it feels like maybe a month later after I had left that band and committed to this, Mark wrote Pumped Up Kicks. He was working in a like uh, sync house to just write songs for films and TV and stuff. And on his free time at the end, he would just work creatively for his own music. And yeah, one night he wrote Pumped Up Kicks. And so he brought it to rehearsal the next day, just as he was doing with a lot of the songs he was working on to try to workshop it and see what we could do. And we all listened to it and didn't, at the time, it was really hard for me. Everything Mark ever played for me always felt like just, oh yeah, that's it. That's the song. Like it was almost so familiar to me. I was like, I had heard this before or something. And this was just another one that felt really good, but I had no clue that it was going to do what it did. And we all got together, started to try to like workshop it and play it. And at that point, we had been trying to build a website and get more traction. At this time, it was like Facebook was really the only social billboard to throw things at. And like streaming wasn't doing what it does now. And so I put together like a really basic website for us. And we got that song. I think a friend of ours had like heard it and got it basically somehow placed in this Elle magazine, like little feature on YouTube. And it was starting to get a little bit of traction there. So in the website, we just built a place where you could come, put your email in and then get that song as a free download. And when it went on to that Elle thing, it just started blowing up. And we had no infrastructure with the band, really. We had like management, basic management, but nothing else going for us. And within a matter of weeks, that song was like charting everywhere. It was really big in Australia. And we just had to kind of try to scramble and put the pieces together to make it look like we were legit, when we really were just like a new band. We didn't have a ton of history. We were still figuring out how to play live together. Um, so in hindsight, it was interesting because the website, I'm a creative person and I like with filmmaking and being crafty with just graphic design and stuff. I knew how to put a website together, but we didn't have a lot. So all the website was just an image of us, the band name, and then this part to put your email in and get the song. Nothing else. And at that time, it was like that was very mysterious. Like you usually could look into a band, get the band members' names, you could go deep dive. And with this, you couldn't. And so it created this like air of mystery that I think actually helped propel us a lot because the song was so big and they would come to the only website and there's just nothing there. So it was an accident in the beginning, but it turned out later that I was like, man, that was actually kind of a really gangster move. It's so creative to do that and leverage that mystery. Um, so it's kind of a long story, but there's so many interesting parts that I think later will be interesting to
Yeah, I'm
reference.
loving all of this, man. This is great.
So then we just started to, I actually still, to be honest, I forget the name of that. There was a website that was like the main place that you could see if music was trending. Machine something. I forget what it was, but it such like a blog, and it was a place that you would go to find the new cool indie stuff. And we had started charting on that. And at one point we were finally like number one. And at that in that day, that was like if you were number one, you are succeeding, like you should be doing some stuff that you take it seriously. And I was just still in such a negative place, disheartened by the whole Malbec thing and the business, and constantly having the industry like blow smoke and say, yeah, you're great, we're going to sign you, and then not doing it, that I was just really pessimistic about everything. It was blowing up, but I was still like, no, this is just fake. This is not like going to be anything promising. Um, and once it hit that chart, we started getting like South by Southwest bookings and starting to get like a little bit of an ability to play big shows. We had still only before South by Southwest, we had only played like maybe 2 shows in LA at the Viper Room. And again, we were just still like getting shit together, but we had all this industry attention at this point. And we went and did South by Southwest and played like so many shows. We like said yes to everything. And then it really like hit. And I'm still at this point, I'm not taking it seriously. I'm just still kind of half committed, not reading the writing is on the wall. I had even, yeah, I was running a marathon, I think at that point. It's South by Southwest. I came back to do a marathon and I had done the marathon to try to process the Malbec stuff. I was just like pissed at life. I was like, I'm going to go do this and prove that I'm valuable. I didn't get any sleep that night from South by Southwest, was drinking, and then I ran a marathon on like 5 hours of sleep or something. It was insane.
Have you
But just to
finished the
show you,
marathon?
what's
Did
that?
you actually finish the marathon?
Yeah, I did. And my time wasn't bad, actually. I was a cross country runner when I was young, but again, it was so much rage in me. That's what got me through it. Um, but so then we eventually, started to get a lot of industry attention. We had really good management, and we knew enough about the industry that we really wanted to get the right people around us. And we did that, and finally did a lot of shopping with labels, and we had the ball in our court, which was so valuable too because everybody wanted us, and we were able to leverage that and get a really good deal with Sony. And even though we were like still getting that deal, I was still kind of like, this isn't, I don't know if this is promising, like still pessimistic until we got to Australia. Australia, it blew up quicker than the States. So we went there pretty quickly. We got invited to a festival. And I remember the first time we got on that stage and it was like they had a curtain in front of us. The curtain opened and I saw this insane tent of just packed to the brim, raging, screaming just as it opened. And then it finally hit. I was like, holy shit, like it's occurring, it's happening. Um, and up until that point, Mark was actually like, I was kept saying, like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to try to like chase this stuff again. And he had told me, he's like, just give me a couple more weeks. It was just before this Australia show. And if it's not feeling good, like you can just back out. But once that show happened, I was like, shit, okay, I'm in. This is crazy. And then it was just a whirlwind of like 2 or 3 years that I don't remember clearly because it was so busy. Um, Never came home. We just said yes to everything. So uh, somewhere in there, we finished the whole record. Pumped Up Kicks was when that was out. We didn't really have anything else recorded, so we spent some months getting the whole record together. Um, got a deal, and then after those 3 years, it was just a whirlwind of life experience that I it's weird because you like dream so long when you're a kid and you're trying to get to that space, and then it happens. And if you don't take like a constant moment and just sit and go, whoa, and try to absorb it, like it just flies by, and you don't really, it feels like I didn't absorb it because it was just so much. But
Did you enjoy?
um,
Do you remember enjoying the process? Like, were you having a good time?
there were parts of it that I was really having a good time. I mean, obviously being able to play big stages with a ton of people, that energy is so incredible. And we got to play SNL, a lot of like late night TV shows. We got nominated for a Grammy. We got to go to the Grammys, and we started meeting like a lot of legends that I'd always wanted to meet. But it's weird. It's like it was kind of surreal. I knew it was legit and real, but like it just happened so fast. I'm like, what is this? So I was enjoying it, but there was a side of me, I think, when I left Malbec and had kind of hit this crisis point, that I was drawn to trying to do something like myself as an artist. And collaborating was great, but I felt like I needed to do and find myself and then find my authentic expression musically. All throughout this, I was mostly just a drummer, but I had started really trying to produce my own stuff. And um, the studio I lived in for the Malbec thing, that was like a rehearsal studio. We had built that up to be a recording studio. So any free time I had, I was in there playing and trying to learn. And I felt like I needed to pursue that more than like a group band. And so there was this kind of thing that I was always in a little bit of a battle of loving this band because it was succeeding and I was being able to achieve a lot of things that I had hoped for. And, monetarily, I was like being supported now, but I was always had this kind of darkness that was like resistant of a lot of it. And so that was like still very much there, even in the peak of the excitement of that band blowing up. There was still something in me that was like not quite satisfied. And so actually after those 2 or 3 years of touring that record, I did like we came back home to have some months off to start to prepare for our new record. And I immediately went to Costa Rica by myself around New Year's and my birthday just to try to figure out what had happened and what this like darkness was that I wasn't really satisfied. And at the end of the day, really what it was like I had achieved everything that culture says is valuable as success. And a lot of my dreams, I'd like checked it off the list, but I just wasn't satisfied. Like there was still this darkness of, is that it? Like I don't know if I'm happy still, but I should be. Like everything culture says, like I should be totally happy. Why am I not happy? So I went there to try to figure it out. And I don't know what I did figure out, but I definitely felt humbled that, I had a lot of gratitude for what had happened. And that I then started to focus on like, what is my purpose in this and why am I not happy? Like, what does make me happy? This external stuff doesn't seem to be fulfilling it. So what now, And that's when I really began starting to question a lot of things, and be really curious about, like you said earlier, like what are we doing here in life? Like what is this thing? Because I don't know if I don't believe it if I'm like not I achieves these things that they say is supposed to bring happiness and it really isn't there. And I've heard that before, but like it's so real once it happens. Um, so that was 3 years in, like I said, and then I began a seeking process of like trying to figure out spirituality, what life is, what consciousness is. And like I said, I grew up Christian, not like from my family, but being in a worship band, I did pick up certain aspects of the religion that I resonated with, but I had a lot of questions. So when the band was peaking, I actually considered myself more atheist and just thought a lot of this was luck and there was no real spiritual element. Um, but in the seeking of trying to have an understanding of life, I started to bump back into some of the things that I did resonate with Christianity in the beginning. And that led me into trying to, seek in these like psychological worlds, like um, a lot of like philosophers, and started reading on the fringes of Christianity, that then started to catalyze like a really deep awareness of life that is not physical and that isn't like provable, and but is not Christianity, if that makes sense. It felt more edgy and like more radical. But I didn't really like understand anything at that point of any kind of darkness, of like dark magic or getting lost in the void. That is all considered, through Christian lens, to be the devil, and you're not supposed to play with. So I was just so curious. I was playing with it all. So a pivotal point was this depression that was in the background all throughout that, and loneliness was all inner feelings, but like the external world was not reflecting any of that. Like I had a lot of, friends and acquaintances, and I had money, and I had these things that should be equating to happiness and not depression. Um, that then led me to this book called The Red Book from Carl Jung. Um, Actually, before that, there was this other book that really like catalyzed everything, which is now it's kind of a cheesy book, but it's still really powerful. But the Eckhart Tolle book, Power of Now,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. I feel like
yeah,
because well, in its own way, that was like a pop sensation, through
it
different places.
was,
So I
yeah.
think I've talked to people and I bring that up, and sometimes people have an attitude or an opinion about them.
That's why, like I say, is like kind of cheesy, because I get that. I get why people think it's like, there's something with that book. To me, it actually feels, to where I am now, it's like the kindergarten beginning of a lot of spiritual awakening, because it is these simple concepts that are like putting you in the present moment, which then opens the door for all of these other conscious spiritual growth. So
Right, right.
it's super important, but I think for some people that are like balls out awake, they're like, yeah, that's like child stuff,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Well, and he's
But
he's so you hear Eckhart talk, and he's such like a character. I mean, he's totally himself, but it's also I remember hearing him for the first time. I was like, is this guy real? Is this like a an
I had the
act?
same thing, man.
Like but he's
I
so genuine. It's like I
Yeah.
don't know.
And I read the books first, and then I started listening to him, and I was like turned off. I almost was like, oh, maybe I should doubt all this because this guy's weird. But then I actually, at that point, I learned how to actually, didn't matter how anybody was going to express what they're talking about, is like, what are they saying? Is that important? Like, does it resonate? Because there's a lot of stuff now that like I've gone through listening to certain lecturers or channelers specifically, that if you just play that for the like average person, they're gonna be like, this guy's on something. He's on drugs, or he's a weirdo. And then it invalidates the information. But the information is really what like matters.
Yeah, well,
So
to stay with him, I mean, there's been so many other philosophers and teachers that I've heard that have essentially in like one sentence of a book or 10 seconds of a talk, they have essentially say everything that Eckhart
everything,
says.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and I'm like,
Yeah,
did he read that book? Did he hear them talk? Because it's almost some of it's almost
totally.
word for word. But
Yeah,
I think I don't know. I think whether or not he was influenced by anyone else, you know, there's certain things that just like
yeah.
come up, in like the from the ether of like it's like
Yeah, that
it's
everybody has access to.
yeah, and you don't even have to look at like consciousness or philosophy about that. Like you look at like invention, like electricity, like there's not one person figuring out these things. History kind of can point at one person as like the innovator, but usually like when you dig into it, you find out that there's like actually a bunch of people that are kind of coming into these truths or observations or inventions, around the same time. It's
Yeah.
like there's something about the
Yeah,
moment,
totally.
in human history.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
You said before that like you were reading around like some fringes of Christianity. Like who, like names or like books or like what? Like what do you mean by that?
I guess mostly what I'm referring to is like the lens that I was looking at anything that was talking about the non-physical world. From that point, like my previous life and upbringing, like the only context that I could put any of that in was Christianity and like Jesus and the spirit. And like when you are playing worship music, you do feel emotions and stuff that are like coming through, and everybody says that's Jesus or that's the Holy Spirit. And as I started to hear other people that, like Carl Jung does have a Christian kind of context that he's putting things in. And so there's like certain things about consciousness and just the spirit world in general that like do reference it, but it's more radical. Like it has not as many guardrails as Christianity does, where it's like good and bad, just go with the good. Carl Jung was talking about like the darkness and that there's like a purpose for it and there's a reason and that's beautiful. And that was like in conflict to me with most Christian thought, but I resonated with it. I was like, yeah, that's actually a wider context. Like that's where all my questions existed when I was in the church was like, why are we have to like push all this other stuff away, but it is a part of life, like all the rules in Christianity never resonated. It didn't feel like it was the whole picture. And so I guess more that's what I'm like referring to, because some of the readers, like some of the things I would read were they would reference Christian ideas, but then when they were adding this like fuller picture. And so it always, if you share it with the wrong Christian person, they just say that's the devil and you shouldn't read it. And so it felt like it was just always on the fringe. But I really liked pushing that boundary because it was answering a lot of my like the harder questions. So really Eckhart Tolle was like the first thing that made me have something from these books that I could try. And along lines of that was also Bruce Lee, which is random, but Bruce Lee like had a lot of really amazing ideas about consciousness and the like in the arts, like how to be your authentic self. There's more power in that. And I actually applied that directly. I read both those books back to back when I was on tour in China, actually. And I Bruce Lee was just, it was all about like being within like no thought and flowing with whatever your craft is. And so he's applying it to martial arts. But for some reason, I just knew I was like, oh, I could just apply this with music. Like I know music enough. I know my craft as a drummer enough that I realized that like if I get out of my own way and like let the thing happen, I could play better. I could play in a more fluid place and actually access parts of the expression more than when I'm trying to kind of think my way through it. It's like trusting the training I've had in my craft and then let go. And also with the power now, like be in the present moment. Don't be thinking about the next bar or the song in its fullness. It's just like what's happening right now. And don't think about it and let go. And for the first time, I've in that band, I mean, this was probably like 7 years into the band at this point. I started playing to a level that I had never played before. And there was like a confidence and something happened. And it confirmed for me that there was like this other part of the world and life that was accessible that you couldn't like prove with logic, but you had to feel your way through it and be present and all of those things that like I just was like, oh, there's something else. Like there's something else here. I don't consider myself atheist anymore, and I don't know what it is, but it's real. And that started to really like catalyze the seeking even more. That I was mostly doing by myself because the relationship I was in, there was conflict within like this kind of spiritual world. And then within the band, there was a little bit of a conflict too. The whole band was all raised Christian, and some of these concepts that I would have loved to be able to talk about and get a reflection and go deep with we're just kind of off limits. And so it was very much on my own, and I was very reclusive at that time. So on tour, I would just be in my hotel room most of the time with like a stack of books, trying to figure it out. And then that's what led me to the Carl Jung book. And then I had my next confirmation of like, there's something else. Um, that book was, it's a very dense book and it's very hard to read. I had to go like one page a day kind of to really like understand what was happening. But I had this very bizarre synchronistic kind of element in life that occurred where I would read these books or these pages every day, and then sometimes we'd have a show at night, and Mark, the lead singer in the band, would have these moments in the middle of the show where he would just kind of channel a thought and talk about something going on, music or whatever. And it was just kind of this more like deeper, it almost felt like church, to be honest. It was like, a light piano in the background playing while he kind of preaches. And it's not like a preaching thing, but it was that kind of environment where you get like serious and deep. And he normally would really just kind of like channel a thought. And so many shows in a row. I haven't really told many people this because it's like it's kind of weird. It involves him, but I would read stuff that I had never conceived of in my life that was like very complex. Carl Jung, many different ideas all flowing into one thought. And that night, Mark would say something so similar to what I was reading, to the point where it was like at first it happened, and I was like, oh, wow, that's a coincidence. But like I'm not sharing any of this stuff with anyone. They don't even know I have this book. But it aligned so well. I was like, that's really bizarre, man. That must be what this like synchronistic thing Carl Jung's talking about. Um, and then it happened like a number of times, like 4 or 5 times in a row, and it kept amplifying to the detail that was occurring. And there was finally one night where I had had a really amazing kind of breakthrough in my own understanding with one of these pages. And then he spoke about it that night to the point where I actually got chill. I like got up off the drum riser and walked off stage because I was like, am I dreaming? Like, this is so weird. I'm like, he's in my head or I'm in his head. Like, what is happening? And it was one of those confirming moments where I was like, there's something else. Like there's something else that I'm communicating with, or it's moving through me and him. And there's so many questions. But eerie, it was just like this metaphysical moment where it's like a ghost kind of thing. Um, and then literally 2 nights later of that, I had finished the Red Book. We were in Rio, Brazil, and I had finally finished it, and I had this night off at the hotel room. It was this beautiful room. We had like windows on all sides. I had like these two big doors I could open. The wind's blowing through and like right on the ocean. And I just had this desire that I was just kind of like, okay, I'm ready for this next level. Like I'd had so many breakthroughs that where you really like you read something and it changes your life. Those kind of things where you're just like, oh my God, like it all makes sense. And I had felt so secure in that. And I just felt I was like, I need to just say something. I guess I'm like, so I'm open. And I literally had the doors open before I was going to bed. And I was like, I'm open to whatever I need to know. Like, I'm here. And kind of feeling cheesy about it, but I was like, well, I just feel like I'm supposed to do that. And so I lay down to go to sleep and could not sleep for like 3 or 4 hours and got into this, what I would call now, it's like a hypnagogic state where you're like half asleep, half awake, and just like in this very weird void place. And then I had like my first like kind of metaphysical experience where uh basically these like 4 or 5 huge beings came through and through the window into my room and lined up, and they were so huge I could only see like the up to their like torso. They were just like through the building, but they like slowly moved in and then like came around the bed. And I'm like half asleep, half I don't know exactly what's going on, but I keep checking. I'm like, no, that's like this is here. It's not, I'm awake, like I'm not in sleep. And I just was observing. I was like kind of told to be quiet. Like not physically, like I didn't hear words, but it was just this like observe it, just go with it and just kind of like let go. And I just sat there for a minute while they like circled around, and then I all of a sudden had this welling up in my gut that almost felt like I was going to throw up. And so then I like sat up and opened my eyes a little bit more, and then, saw these beings. And then something just made me like purge. And I thought I was going to actually throw up. Like I thought that's what it felt like. And then in like full exorcist style, I like leaned back, and basically it felt like I was like barfing up bees. Like I could feel it come up my stomach, like through my throat, and then I was like, my mouth was forced open, and it was like from the Green Mile. If you've ever seen that movie where the prisoner's like, you take somebody's pain, and then he goes ah, and like all these bees come out. It's exactly what it felt like. And again, as it was happening, I opened my eyes because I was like, is this really like what the hell's going on? And that's what it looked like. It was just like little light crystals just flying up. And then after that, like I felt immense peace and just like fell back to the bed and fell right asleep, like just instantly. It was like a crazy euphoria, and slept like a rock that night. And then woke up in the morning, all my windows were still open, and I had to like unpack what had happened. I couldn't tell if it was a dream, if like what had gone on. But then as I sat with it, I was like, that Jesus, there were like again another confirmation, like there's something else going on. And none of it felt bad to me because I was also at a point where I was like understanding certain energies are not like in your best interest, certain ones, it's all about feeling and that kind of stuff. And it just felt right. Um, and so I was journaling this whole time too, and had like spent an hour writing it all down, writing the number of my room that I was in, the time, the date, because I knew like numerology was going to be important at some point. So just like documenting everything. And then from that point forward, I felt like a new person. Like there was something that just, a lot of that depression was gone. There was a confidence in what I was doing, but still knew that I was like possibly not in the right place of life as far as like being in the band and being with the people that I was, and not in a hierarchical way. I was just like, there's something wrong here, but like, whoa, I feel like I've achieved something and I have this understanding now. And so a lot of the tension that was previously there in the band specifically was gone. And I just felt like anew. And again, that was like a double down on the seeking. I got home from that tour and was just full blown uh trying, like philosopher, trying to figure everything out, taking any book, anything that I could, any lecture. And I got into like Alan Watts and Terence McKenna and a lot of these like real obvious like deep thinkers. Um, and then eventually started to experiment with psychedelics. Um, because at that point, there was like, I had had this sober metaphysical experience that I wanted to really understand, like, what is that world? How do I put myself in it and, learn more, and Terence McKenna was really like my guide to that. I just listened to everything I could of his and read his books, and then felt like I knew, how to do it safely. And so experimented with psilocybin for the first time, not long after that tour. And then from that point, it's like really then that was like my main focus. Music was still, I was in the band and it was like my job really, but I started getting so much fulfillment from just deeply thinking, trying to have deep conversations with people to understand more. And it became like my obsession. Uh, and it still is, I think at certain points you feel like you've gotten to the end and go, okay, I know it. I know what everything is. And then you get thrown on your ass again and like, no, you're still probing more information. And I don't think that ever ends. I've definitely like pulled off of it a bit now because I realize there's no end to it. And So if I get to a place where I feel good and I can practice a new way of being, I'll do that for a while instead of picking up the book. It kind of became an escapism for me for a little bit. Um,
Yeah, it really
so yeah,
can. I
that's
mean, I've been through that phase as well, where it's like new information becomes this gateway to all this
it's
curiosity, all this freedom,
yeah,
but like
yeah,
anything else, anything can become like an idol or like something heavy and like a chain. And like, like this is why like there are so many um, things that started off pure, but then they become like these systems, these monoliths that just become so
yeah,
heavy, and you're like, man, like that's not what was there at the start of it. That's not why
totally.
people were like. There's, I, I, I think of this often, like when I get too either like angsty or depressed about like really big systems or structures, because a lot of those things started with just someone that had an idea or was following their thing, and they started small, and there was probably some purity to it, at some level. Um, but then, yeah, the way that the world goes and
Yeah,
things get big and bulky and heavy, and then it's like there's no lightness, there's no freedom, there's no, yeah,
yeah,
there's nothing in it anymore.
yeah, totally. What I found too for myself that there was like it almost became a drug because I was after that aha moment where you go, holy shit, okay, I understand it now. Something, a trauma in my past and like early in life that I could never get, that now I get it and I feel lighter. And I was always after that. Like the first time you smoke weed, it's just like, oh, and then you start smoking a lot and you can't get that thing anymore. And so it really did become like a vice and kind of an addiction that I eventually had to realize that's like I'm chasing something that I could probably achieve if I just actually get more in my body and like be alive and live in gratitude and all these things. And so it's such a gnarly thing. I mean, I think understanding the meaning of life and consciousness and all of that is like something we all pursue, but like the moment you kind of get to a new level, it goes up to another level and you can't ever like get there because there's so much to understand and so much to like expand to um that like chasing it that way, it's like I started to get what they call like, flying too close to the sun. Like my head was trying to understand all of the things and could, but I didn't know how to ground it down and like practice that being like still in that every day and really had to like cut it like a drug, and really like feel my feelings deeply now and not bypass it with a book and a heady kind of understanding. Which is still, it's like what I'm practicing today still is trying to not escape the mundane parts of life that there are so much value in and there's so much like beautiful profound insights that can come from that if you're still enough and trying to figure out like what that balance is, like continue to seek and be open but live the life too. Like that's at the end of the day, it's like that's what's so you start to realize is so special is just being alive and being able to observe and experience the way life is. Um, and it's what now I call it's like kind of the more psychedelic thing to do because I was a little bit on the psychedelic train for a while too, just needing it to make myself not feel depressed and get insights. But then I realized I was like, it's actually even a more gnarly psychedelic thing to try to bring all of that into everyday life sober and have a conversation with the gas attendant with the understanding of how profound this is and how you know magical it can be to have a conversation and let it lead you somewhere to have a profound insight, and that's a challenge. It's like it's the harder thing to do sometimes, but I find it to be like it's more of a like edgy thing, I guess,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
me.
yeah. I think about just like it feels like an in and out experience constantly. Like
Yeah.
everyone's special, but nobody's special. Like there are no
Yeah,
ordinary
exactly.
people, but everyone's ordinary. Like we can't. The mind wants to like solve everything. Like if I just figure it out, then everything will be all right. But like you said, like you have to have like an open heart. You have to like embody it and actually live life, you know. And you can't always be in this like kind of universal everything is one. Like you have to particularize yourself at some point. Like
Yeah.
even like musically, like you can. Gosh, like I had a friend. No, he's still a friend. He's brilliant. I mean, perfect pitch. Like he can compose an entire piece, an entire song, all in his head, like all the parts and everything. Like he can say, like, yeah, I can hear it. This does this, this does this. But it's like, at some point, you've got to like pluck the string. You got to hit the drum.
Right.
You actually have to particularize that mental, that thing that doesn't have form. It has to come into some sort of form, you know. And I think, yeah, like what you said, like life is this constant, just like journey. I think going back and forth between those two, because both of them are real, both of them are true. But if you're always just living in this conceptual mental, you know, that has no form, then I don't know. Maybe it works for some people, but like I'm noticing like that it's this back and forth, this wave that kind of I have to experience, you know, to fully feel alive and content and happy and
Yeah.
to be curious, you know.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like breathing almost. It's just like kind of in and out thing that has to occur.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I want to ask you about human design. This might be a good time to enter into that because
Yeah.
and I'll preface it by this, like I've done so many personality tests over the years and I always repelled at like just the being pinned down by anything, you know?
Yeah.
And then so many of them have you know, their own language. It kind of feels it can feel exclusive, you know, because there's these languages around it. And I remember specifically like when a bunch of my friends were getting to Enneagram, like I would dabble with it and I'll be like, oh, this makes sense. This is kind of true. But it's almost like they were in this like cult of Enneagram where like that's what they were how
Yeah.
they were filtering everything in their life through it. And I was like happy that they were experiencing, you know, insight and openness and, you know, these profound things, but it also felt like a club that I wasn't interested in being a part of. And when I first heard about human design, it was actually like that. I'm like, this thing is so complicated. Like, I'm not
It
saying,
was for me too.
yeah, I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not saying there isn't like some good stuff in here, but I don't think I've got the time to like decipher this all, you know. But it hasn't been, and it hasn't been until like the last year that it's like working at the edges of it or just hearing people talk about it. It's like, oh, that makes sense. Um, and you're one of those people. Like when I heard you in that podcast talking about being a projector and talking about human design, it was one of the first times I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense, and it made a lot of sense how I perceive my kids and how I think about creativity and art. And so thanks first off for kind of being like a door that kind of like opens me up to that world because I still feel like I'm in an elementary learning or understanding of it, but it has been really
Yeah.
helpful. And so I'm really curious to know like when did human design become a thing for you? Or when did you hear about it? Like how did you get into it?
So I heard about it probably, I mean, it's 5, 6 years ago that I first heard about it and kind of bumped into it, just like you said. Like it was um another like point along the path of seeking. There's like astrology and enneagrams, there's the I Ching, all these other like tools that are helpful to understand like what life is. And for me, it just felt like it was almost just like you go read your astrology chart, like in a way online that like does resonate. There's a lot of cool stuff, but I don't understand all these numbers and channels and gates, and it's definitely a deep dive. That I started to do a little bit. I bought a bunch of books just so I had like backlog so I could go to it when it resonated again. But I think I just read my like little online profile once and was like, okay, cool. And then just kind of kept seeking and doing life. And then it started coming back up again, like through friends or people that would like mention it or ask what type I was. Um, that then I started to get a little more pull of curiosity into it. And I think where it really like clicked actually was as I was beginning to figure out like that I really wanted to leave Foster the People. Um, that something happened where I just like I embraced parts of it and started to play with it a bit more. And it liberated me from a lot of the hurdles that I was starting to get bump up against to and like actually making the decision to leave and how to express that and what I was going to do after and what am I supposed to do? You know, if I leave that, so much of my identity and so much rearranging needs to happen. This became like a tool to help understand that and how to like be myself. And so I I then started getting like a couple readings from people, you know, like people online that will do a reading for you. And realized that there was like different flavors of just like my own profile, like different people were expressing and telling me deeper things about it, more than you can just read online. And so it was like, oh, this is kind of like an art too. It's like tarot or astrology. There's many different ways to look at just one aspect of it. And so it then started to, I realized it was like this deep, deep thing that could probably bring a lot of meaning in life. And being a projector, there is like some uniqueness to it, as far as I had all the wrong people around me, and I was living like what culture kind of says we're supposed to be, which is like a worker bee. You work really hard, you push, you do all these things that like my inside was not wanting to do that, but like was doing it. And learning about the projector specifically, that there isn't this like well of energy to access all the time, and you actually can achieve things that you desire more in like a magnetism way, kind of like a manifesting thing, but like you don't have to physically work really hard to get the things. You can align yourself with a certain part of your energy and rest properly and do all these things that I used to call like being lazy, because that's what culture says it is. If you're not working every day and showing up, like you're lazy, you don't really care. But I knew I cared so much, but that there was like some other way to get there. And so that liberated me a lot. And I feel like when I just immediately started doing some of those things, not pushing myself so hard and laying back, that a lot of things actually did start to change. And I could feel this other magical part of the universe like starting to communicate again. And so it became then like a more serious tool that I wanted to reference with a lot of things that were happening in life. I would just go look at a deeper side of my profile, or then look at other people's profiles that I was, you know, having discourse with, or there was something wrong, that to then understand a deeper part of them that was easier to accept somehow through the human design thing, that I could see as like, oh, you're expressing it this way because that's how your energy is. And like I'm misunderstanding it, but through the human design lens, oh, I see how we're supposed to like connect or not connect. Um, so it was like gradual for me for sure. I thought in the beginning it was this like clubby thing that didn't, maybe wasn't going to be something useful, but I do look at it now as like, understanding where it came from too, I think is kind of important. A lot of people have, when things are channeled, you know, like this information was channeled through one person and he put together this kind of outline of essentially what all humans are. They fit in these categories. And you can get fine detailed on each one, but it's really saying like everyone is individually like super unique, and there is no homogenization to this kind of way of looking at it. And that resonated with me a lot. I was always drawn to like, we're supposed to be in a community of oneness. We're all one, and like we need to get into community with like-minded people. And every time I would try that, or imagine myself trying to go to these like meetups that end up becoming cults kind of thing, where they're just trying to all have this same heightened awareness, high consciousness ideal and be together, it always felt gross to me. And then when I actually tried to like do that at certain times, like just have meetings with a lot of people that you think are kind of like awake on the same level, it was super hard to actually like jive. There's a lot of people have different ways of moving through the world and different shadows that they're still working on. But this human design thing like allowed it to be, I could see that there's a way for us all to potentially harmonize and be together and work really good together in like a fractal way that requires you being like fully aligned with who you are and understanding that and fulfilling that like completely. And that if we all do that, there is a way where it syncs up effortlessly. But there's no one religion or one way of looking at the world that's doing it, besides some of these like macro things. Like, yes, we are all one of this source, but how are we all seated down and have free will and are so individually unique when we're all one? How do you work together? And so that like clicked at some point where I was like, oh, this is the answer. It's a tool that if you use it in the right way and you embody what your energy type is, then we become closer to like you just find yourself around the people you're meant to be around. And there is a like give and take that happens that is never like someone doing something out of obligation or because they think they're supposed to do that because it's the right way to be enlightened. It's like, no, you be extremely authentic. And if you don't want to do that thing, you don't do it. But there's somebody else that you're around that that's their purpose is they want to do that thing. So then it gets fulfilled, you know. It's a kind of a complicated thing, the idea of like fractal reality. But nature is like the best example for it, you know. It's like it really is right there. Like the mushrooms are not telling the trees to be more like a mushroom because it like the whole thing wouldn't work. You know, the birds are not telling everything else to be more bird like. They're just being exactly what they are, and then everything functions really well. Like everything is feeding the other and they're all like harmonized, you know. And so it's this fractal thing. And I think that's why nature is so unstoppable and powerful. Because it has that way of evoking life. And so I think that's what we're meant to do. And human design has been the only thing that I've found that like really hits all of those marks. Um, and so back to what I was saying, like it's being channeled from this person. I think it's something that some people will doubt because it's like one guy that just went into this state and like pulled this all out. Does he have some kind of bias or some kind of thing that he's wanting to get from it? But I think when you do have your own experience with moving into this other space of information and, you know, downloading, as they say, or pulling in a magnitude of like a lot of information that you can't really like speak about or say it, it's too much, but you just feel it and know it. Then you can understand like some channel, like that's how most of the profound information comes through. It's like that's how it comes through artists. Like most of the great art is like they didn't think about it. They just moved into the space and it came out. And so I trust a lot of those things. I think there's still room for you have to discern what resonates, and some people do have biases that come through as distortions. But um, all in all, that validated it more for me that it was something that was channeled from this higher energy. And I could trust it a bit more. And the way that it involved the I Ching, astrology, um, even Enneagram stuff, there's like all of these other things that kind of center into human design. It just felt like it was really checking off all the boxes. And the more I played with it and the more I actually tried to practice it for my type, like everything starts to really work. Like you tap into this indescribable universal way of getting information, magnetizing things to you, and feeling fulfilled and happy. And I started feeling way less depressed, to be honest, with doing it and practicing it, you know.
That's amazing.
So that's a long description of it, but
Yeah.
we can get more into the other details of it, you know,
No,
if you
no,
want.
that's really helpful. I mean, I hear what you're saying about like the channeling thing. I think it can be a buzzword for some people that like they have some
Yeah,
resistance to, but like you already started to use the analogy, like everyone perfectly accepts if Springsteen says, "Man, that song just wrote itself." Like it just came out, right? Or like how many other
yeah,
more formal religious traditions have prophets, or someone wrote this book or said these things, and they're accepting of the idea that God like spoke through them, So like the the idea of like channeling in a modern sense rubs a lot of people, I think, the wrong way, and yet um, it's just one symbol or one idea of it because they accept it in all these other areas of their life, whether it's way back, in history or like
Right.
currently, you know what I mean? Like it is like, I mean, I think about it as, just being a parent sometimes. Like there's so many things that happen that you just react to and you just do. Um, and people will say, well, that's like the mothering instinct or like the parenting instinct. Like, well, what else? That's channeling. You know what I mean? Like, what,
Yeah.
how do you explain it? It's like magical and mystical, and who knows why you do what you do?
I think we've been a lot of like, it's part of the conditioning. It's part of the conditioning of like, we're not supposed to trust or believe anything that can't be proven via facts, that it has to be something that you can read about and find the reference of where that came from. That it's hard when there's something profound coming out that has no source but some etheric moment that happened. It's like we're programmed to think that that's not real and that's dangerous, or that can't be right. That person is trying to get attention or make money off of it, which is valid in some senses, but I think we are losing. If you throw all of that out the window, it's there's so much of life that isn't provable with facts and like tactile information. Like love is something that nobody, like, what is that? You can't really say what it is, but everybody knows the feeling of it and that it is this other thing. And consciousness in general, we don't know what it is. You can't describe what it is, but because you know and you're thinking.
Define
So
define what
this,
a soul is. Tell me what that is.
yeah.
Yeah, and like you
So
said, like all of our culture and society, most of us how we were raised, it's like you you spend a lot of time researching, you trust the people that have spent a lot of time in this field or this area that have expertise and cited sources, and all that stuff's great. That is not it's not to diminish any of that, but
right.
when you're always looking outside of yourself for the expert to confirm, the truth, you're not working the muscle of like trusting yourself, of
Yes.
listening to your own intuition, of acting, when your body's telling you this is the way to go, So
Yeah.
there's like there's room for all of it, but most of us, I know for me, like it's been a journey of learning how to trust myself and hear that intuition and actually act on it, and it's
Yeah.
like anything else, like the more you work that muscle, like it actually like becomes more alive. You can experience and have a relationship with that even more, and yeah, it just takes you
I
to
think
all
that's the
sorts of new
biggest part
places.
of the human design stuff that I found is like the key to it is the deconditioning part, as they say, which is like, you know, trying to figure out and understand that there's a lot of the way that we're taught to perceive life, um, that some of that is not necessarily correct, and it doesn't, I wouldn't say it's not correct, it's correct, but it leaves out all of these other parts of life that you can't prove with the facts. So we're living in a reality that is all about the scientific materialism stuff, which has gotten us so far. But I realize there's so much conditioning of like how to be, how to think, what to know is real or not, that actually stops the other part of reality that is more etheric and spiritual from coming in, because your mind is going, no, that's not real. So you don't see it. Like you can actually, like, if you've been taught and you actually currently think that ghosts or apparitions or other beings that are like etheric don't exist, like you won't see them. It can happen every now and then, but I think it's some kind of the universe or something is trying to open your awareness where it all of a sudden will happen. But I know for me, like that wasn't occurring in my life. I think maybe I'd seen a ghost or something when I was younger and like loved the idea of a magical world, but like it was really in my conditioning. Like I wasn't even aware that there was that doesn't fit in my reality that that's real because I've been taught so much. Even if I wasn't directly taught, it's like it's in the information, it's in the movies, it's just something that's in the movies that's not real. You're taught that it isn't real, you know. But the moment I was like, I had those metaphysical experiences and I was like, okay, now it fits in my reality. Like that stuff is, it's possible. I believe it to be real. Then I start seeing it, you know. And so you've opened up this awareness, but it takes like you have to kind of question it all, and that leads you to start to decondition, which then opens the door for these other parts of reality that then you can tap into and experience. But I think that's the hardest part of the human design stuff is like the deconditioning is one of the most important aspects to get you in the door to practice the stuff and actually understand that there is something real there. They say it takes like 7 years. I think it's mostly for projectors, but I think with anything you could probably say that's like a 7 year quest to actually decondition all of the false perceptions in reality that you could say is like there's a purpose for it, whether it's like the they doing that to keep us out of our power, or if it's just something that has happened over time, or something that we chose to actually have as a labyrinth to get through. But that's the hardest part for sure. And I think we're always in uncovering more of the conditioning. For me, I thought I had it all deconditioned, but there's like daily, I'm just kind of like, oh, whoa, no, there's like a habit there that's based on a false belief for me. It's like when I really look at it, I was like, I don't believe that actually. So let me work on grounding that into my reality. And the more that happens, the more this human design stuff is like, it's so tactile and real.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Man, this has been a really fun conversation. I wonder if we can just wrap up by maybe we take from the end of Foster into the music that you're making now,
Oh yeah.
and where you are, because we're in your studio. Suitnop is the name of the
Yeah.
artist, the band, the project. So tell me about that journey from leaving Foster to stepping into this new artist self.
Yeah, it's the most uncomfortable thing I've had to do in my life. It's I just say that because it's kind of the stuff I was hitting on earlier of being such a people pleaser and kind of living a life that wasn't really authentic to me that I had to painfully realize was happening. Um, was something that I knew I needed to. I think it really did begin, like I said, when I left Malbec and was going into Foster, that I was starting to peer into this other thing that my soul wanted to express purely. Um, and I was going to begin that process there. And then Foster the People happened, which I'm so thankful for, and I grew so much from that. But then, as I was realizing I needed to leave, for a multitude of different reasons, one of them being like I wanted to be free of any kind of limitations, whether that's the business or just collaborating with people, to try to explore like what do I sound like just me. And I finally had had enough confidence and ability to kind of make music in a way that I could go explore that. And I had been throughout the entire existence of the band, I had been working on music alone by myself and never really shared it with anybody because I knew I was trying to like figure it out and I was pretty insecure about it. But once I left, I took a huge long break just to be away from music and was seeking and just working on conscious stuff and didn't I was kind of disheartened by all the music and creativity in general. But I then started to like feel the itch again and went back into my computer over these 10 years and found a ton of stuff that like I felt I had been away from long enough that when I re-listened, it actually excited me and it felt very much like that this is the beginning of me finding out like what that is. And I also didn't, I really at this point, like I had no attachment to what that's going to be like. I don't want to be in a band. I don't want to play live. I don't want to do so many aspects that come along with when an artist makes music. Like, what do you do with it? I really was just curious to like make something that was me and put it out for a reflection back, even if it's just a couple people, to just have that experience. And so I finally started to put together, like, find out which songs that I really liked and like narrow them down. Um, and I actually as well started using Jessa's podcast, my partner. On her podcast, she has like little intro music and stuff. And I started using that as a place to just try out different ideas. And so on her podcast, there's a lot of we just would change the song every couple episodes and let the whole song play as like part of her. She likes to having this kind of vibe check at the beginning. So it was like a really nice place for me to experiment with putting music out on a very low level, not having a lot of people see it. Um, and that helped give me a little bit more confidence just to like unapologetically be me and just do whatever it is and really not be attached to it. And so, yeah, that's what Suitnop started. Suitnop's my last name backwards, which I've used as like an email forever. And some friends call me that. It still like makes me cringe when you think of it as like an artist name, but it just is like fit. And so I feel like, again, I didn't really have much intention with this all. So that's the name of it. But I then, when I finally got the music together, I've never been a lyric person. I've always listened to music just from the vibe and the energy of it. Even within my band, I didn't listen to our lyrics until like 7 or 8 years in, when I actually started to like consciously expand. That then I was curious about it, and I realized so many of those lyrics were actually like very important to me, even though I didn't write them. Mark wrote them. Um, I think there's a very interesting connection that would have to be another podcast about like how you can have this soul connection with another person and how you can transfer in those channeling moments. You're like transferring thoughts and feelings that get expressed. And so
Buddy,
there's so much.
that's all of music though, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
how many great concerts have you been to when like lead singer and the guitar player or the drummer and the bass player are having a moment and like they're riffing or soloing or whatever. Like it's just yeah.
Yeah, it's otherworldly. And it's like there's so much connection with that dude that I don't think either one of us fully understand, but like there's been this magnet and repelling that is really hard to balance, and which is ultimately I think why we like separated, because there's so much great stuff that can happen in that tension, but at a certain point there's like something, I don't know, something has to shift. But when I looked at those lyrics and so much of the band, like as I was starting to expand consciously, I was like, Jesus, this is all so connected in this very weird spider web. And but I never been like a lyric person. I never listened to them, and therefore I feel like I'm very good at writing them. But I make music actually in a similar way that Mark does, where I can hear melodies, and like when I'm in a safe place, I love like scatting on the mic, just to come up with melodies. And then often it's like gibberish, but often like words do stick out when I go back and listen, and so I can kind of decipher what I think is trying to be said. And so I would do that all throughout the band. Like when I was working on my own music, I would do that a little bit, but I could never really get it to make sense. And so actually with Jessa, my partner, she is very good with words, and I don't let many people like come into my creative space, but we're so connected to each other that I felt like she was listening to a lot of it. And then it finally dawned on me, I was like, maybe I should let her listen to these gibberishes and see if she's just like comes up with anything and can decipher it for me. And so we started working together on that, and it was incredible. It was like such a helpful view and perspective to kind of come in and really like bring to light what I think I was trying to say. And again, it was like more of a channeling thing. Like I didn't have a story in line, but so she kind of really helped it like finish by getting actual lyrics to all these songs that felt very much like me and this inner thing that was happening. But she really like finished it at the end. And so it was nice to like collaborate with someone you're in love with in that way and have it not be like combative at all, which can happen when you're, in a lot of the collaborating scenarios. So that's what this record was called. It's called Safe, um, which was kind of labeled because it was finally I feel safe to do it, but then it also was coming from a safe of a hard drive that I'd had from 10 years ago. So a lot of those songs are 10 years old. There's only one or two that were done within the last year. Um, and so for me, it's just been this really, it feels like I'm finally, once I like finished it and actually put it out, I realized the end part of that experience of really expressing it and feeling fulfilled by it was you have to put it out. Like we were saying before, you have to materialize the thing for it to be finished. And I was just sitting on that stuff for so long that and thought I was fulfilled, but it's kind of masturbatory. I would just come down here and listen to it by myself and be like, yeah, cool, and like share it to a couple of friends, but like bashful about trying to put it out because I think I was afraid too. I didn't want people to think I was trying to be a solo artist after this entire experience that I had, which that's what a lot of people do is they leave the band and then they're like, here's my solo thing. I'm better. And I really didn't want to be thrown into that. And it's like not at all the intention. This is just a very pure personal thing that the goal was just to put it out and like that was it and I would be done. And so I didn't really do your typical like promotion and press about it. I just kind of like slipped it out there. And it's been so satisfying. I feel like I am finally like not constipated for 10 years of it, It's like so it's exciting to me and it's definitely like a little bit of a capsule of that kind of whole period of my life. There's a lot of uh, feelings and even lyrically, there's stuff in there that like really encapsulates that period of my life. I do have like a ton more music that I eventually want to just keep doing this and putting out more and more things with not a lot of attachment to like what I'm going to do with it. But I go through waves too as a projector. It's like sometimes I'm really excited about music and feeling extremely creative, and I'll show up and do things, but then it'll be a month or two where I'm just like, I don't feel drawn to go to the studio and luckily I don't have any pressure to go down there and do it for money or to uphold something. So I feel really grateful that I can kind of do it whenever I want. And so that's kind of where I'm currently at. Like I'm working with a couple other people, just producing them but they're in the same kind of wavelength. They don't have like a huge pressure to go out and be famous or release it. They're trying to find themselves in it too. And I really love working with people that are like that are just trying to kind of find a different part of themselves and express it. And so there's a couple people that I'm like slowly moving forward with on that, which I find really satisfying as well. But it's cool. Music has changed for me a lot. Like having that whole experience with the business and having it be your identity. I liked a lot of things about it, but there's a lot of things that I didn't jive with as the business and the expectation. And I'm really excited to do music in this kind of new space where there's not a lot of pressure and I can kind of ebb and flow with it when I want. And it is nice to get a reflection back with just one person liking it is enough for me. It feels exciting. So,
I love that, man. I resonate a lot with what you say in terms of like I have this whole previous career with music, and I came to this point where I realized, like you, I don't want this to be the day job anymore. I don't want this to be something I have to do, and feeling that kind of just grind or exhaustion, or I got to do this, I got to figure that out. And it was like a light bulb that went off one day. I was like, oh, if I don't want my art to be that way anymore, I actually have to just stop doing it that way and
yeah,
and find a different way to do it. So it's like I had to just start saying no before, well, honestly, so that I could learn to approach it again, kind of like what you're saying, like do it only when I've got the space, when I have the love, when I've got like the connection with the people that I want to do it with.
yeah,
Because that's ultimately how I started loving
right.
music.
That's like how we all started and we
Right.
lose it somehow.
Totally. And that is like and I don't want to say like that as hard as that has been, that process has been, that whole thing is actually like a gift too, because
Yeah.
how many times have I said like, man, like junior high or high school version of me would like be freaked out at the experiences, the people, the places, you know, like your experience. Like I felt like I won the lottery in terms of the successes or the places that my passions took me, you know. And yet that's why it's so yeah, it's just like a sucker punch when you're like, wait a second, this doesn't fulfill me anymore, or like I
Yeah.
made it, but it doesn't feel like I've made it. Like there's something else to explore, you know. And so there's a lot of struggle and darkness and searching that I've been through, but yeah, like what you're experiencing, I'm like reflecting back because it's been like finding the love and the passion again, um, with a really like safe boundary around it because you care
Yeah.
so much. Um, it's just like a huge gift to give to yourself and to your art and what you want to do, you know. So
Yeah, and I found being like authentic is like a really hard to do once you've had the habit of you figure out what works for money or for someone else, and that you end up having a habit of kind of it's why it becomes work because you're trying to figure out where you how you add to it. And there's always like you definitely you can add your flavor of playing or producing, but I found it really hard to try to find this like authentic part. Like I'm constantly battling in my head when I'm making it, wanting to make it sound like something that my friend wants to hear or what like culture says is cool now. It's like I'm constantly having to kick that thing out. And if you're only doing it for like when you really love to do it and you're really excited and you're playful, like that's when the authenticity really can, it's effortless. It just happens. And so I think you're right. Like saying no to a lot of things is like the first step of trying to like get space to practice getting those habits out the door and practicing the new muscle of like just authentic. And at the end of the day, that's what I've learned is like it's the only thing really that I think we're supposed to do in the world is like for our soul is figure out how to be you authentically as possible. And if you want to express art with that or just show up in the world that way, that's like where all our desires are, they come from is doing that with no fear. But it's so much easier said done than trying to actually doing it. It's like I realized how hard it was. And I thought I was confident and like was somebody that, you know, was authentic, but it was a long process and painful of realizing like, oh my God, I've been people pleasing, I've been being fake because I thought that's what like was going to be the safest route. And I could see myself at the end of my life if I had kept doing that, that I would be so upset and pissed that I never like authentically tried it and just tried to be me and show up how I really want to show up. And so it's a challenge, but like I am liberated by the idea finally now that I'm like, that's the only thing to do. There's if you're just faking it or performing for someone else, you're not at the end of the day, you're not going to be satisfied. Like you may get material success and material things here and there, but like I know now, like having experienced that, like it didn't satiate the soul, it didn't make me happy. The more I'm authentic and the more I just like push through that, it's like I feel it. I feel like I'm starting to really just be happy with a lot of things that were much harder to be happy with before. So,
that's great, man. I think that's a great place to wrap up, man. Thanks for
yeah.
spending this time with me, man. I've really enjoyed the convo.
Yeah, this was awesome. And I'll just throw in there last minute too, because I would kick myself if I didn't. It's new for me, but these sessions like I did with you,
Yeah, I wanted you to tell people about it. So
yeah,
how if you're like a creative person, if anything about this conversation resonated with you and you want to just talk to Mark about anything creative, tell us about that offering.
yeah, I so it's for creatives and then also if you're into human design, we can get into that world too. I really enjoy talking with projectors, but any other type too. I think I've got a lot to I've experienced with different people, and we dive into it a lot over here, me and Jessa. So that's kind of what the main thing is like creative people that are trying to figure out how to be their authentic self, how to not feel the need to use the corporate system as a model to be successful. So any of those things, I'm offering like sessions, just like 1 hour sessions to talk and unpack whatever you want, really. I'll have to give you a link. I think it's Jessa sets up all the details for me. So I don't even I think it's at it's called acuity.com. That's just Mark Pontius Acuity. But I'll send you a link where you can book in there.
Yeah.
So
I think that's so helpful, man. I don't know if you saw it. I think it's this past week. I think it's the CEO of Spotify.
I
A
think
bunch
I
of my
saw that.
artist friends were saying like where he said content is essentially it takes no money, you know, to create
Yeah.
content. So many of my friends were pissed off and posting this, and you know what? Honestly, my first thought was, I was like, well, thank God that I'm not in the business of making content. I'm in the business of making art.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's like, I think there's like a thing to empower. Like, are you here to just like create a bunch of shit, like a bunch of content? Like, I know that that's how we feel every day. We look at our phones or we look at these things. It feels like we just have to produce. But it's like, no, no masterpiece was ever created that way that we, you know,
Yeah.
are inspired by. Like, the reason why that we were drawn to music, you know, from our earliest ages, it wasn't to create a bunch of content, you know. So
Right.
it's like flip that around, like give yourself some empowerment that like you don't have to be that worker bee, like you said, because you're doing something different, you know. And
Yeah.
I know talking to you in our session, it gave me that sense of kind of like empowerment and a different perspective. So yeah,
Well, that's cool, man. Yeah, it was a fun session. I'm glad this all worked out.
yeah. And then it's suiting up on any of your streaming services to check out the
Yeah,
record. Yeah,
on Spotify with Mr. Elk.
yeah,
Um, unfortunately, but
yeah.
yeah, no, it's on all the streaming platforms. Suitnop, Suitnop.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. It was great talking to you, man. I hope it's not the last time. So
No, yeah, let's do this again. This was great. It
yeah.
was really fun. Thanks for having me on.